The main street of Red Bluff shimmered under a scorching afternoon sun. Dust floated like gold flecks in the dry air, refusing to settle. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Horses twitched at the hitching rail tails sweeping at the flies, while the faint plunk of a saloon piano leaked through swinging doors. Most of the Prairie Settlers had spilled outside, drawn by the commotion on a wooden stand at the square's heart. On that rough platform stood two barefoot Apache sisters, their wrists bound tight with coarse rope. The elder Wachiwi Sky lifted her chin, clinging to dignity, as stubborn as the desert wind. Her long black hair hung loose in thick strands, and her deerskin dress was torn along the hem and one shoulder. The slipped strap revealed more than she wished, yet she refused to hide, denying the crowd the thrill of seeing her flinch. Beside her, Ahyoka Dawn, barely 20, and slighter in frame, pressed close for courage. Raw welts ringed her wrists where the rope had bitten deep. Her buckskin was worse for wear, mud-stained and ripped. Each leering stare made her bite her lip until it bled, but she stayed rooted beside her sister. 3 days earlier, they'd been seized by a gang of Dust Creek riders accused of trespassing near a waterhole and of cattle theft no one could prove. Locked in a shed until this day, they were now to be sold for the town's so-called justice and to fill Grant Pike's coffers. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "All right, boys. 2 together, no splitting. You won't see another pair like this." He slapped his ledger and grinned. Coins clinked, wagers barked out like it was sport. The sound churned Wachiwi's stomach. She weighed a desperate leap, but 2 steps would bring a bullet or a lasso. Her jaw tightened. If she could not run, she would stand unbroken. A burly, drunk Buck Riker swaggered forward, the very ranch hand who had first captured them. His shirt bore whiskey stains, boots scuffed raw. He waved a fistful of coins, shouting his bid so loud the square seemed to shrink around his voice. "I'll take the tall one first," he jeered, and Ahyoka winced. Wachiwi's hands knotted into fists behind the rope. She imagined clawing at his face, even knowing they'd only tie her tighter. The thought still burned like fire. Then the air shifted. From across the street strode Wade Hollis, the town's quiet but unyielding sheriff. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, his trail-worn coat buttoned tight against the dust, he moved with a steadiness that parted the crowd without a word. The worn revolver on his hip told of years of hard miles. He hadn't meant to interfere, but word of 2 young Apache women being auctioned like cattle had reached him that morning, and something in his gut said this ended here. Maybe it was memory of Ada Hollis, his late wife who once carried food to tribal camps, despite every whisper against her. Maybe it was simply that he'd buried enough innocent people already. Wade stepped forward and let a heavy pouch of coins drop onto the platform. The solid thud silenced the auctioneer mid-sentence. "Count it," Wade said evenly. The man peered inside, nodded. "Sale's done." Buck Riker's face flushed crimson. "The hell it is. I had a bid." Wade's hand slid to his belt, not drawing, but making his intent plain. The crowd hushed. "You heard him," Wade said flatly. "Sales closed." Buck spat in the dirt and lurched back toward the saloon, muttering curses. Wade climbed the steps, drew his knife, and sliced the ropes free. The coarse strands fell away. Wachiwi lowered her arms slowly, rubbing blood back into her hands, eyes fixed on the stranger who had just bought their freedom, wondering if this was rescue or simply another kind of prison. "Come on," Wade said quietly. The sisters followed him down the steps. The Prairie Settlers parted in silence as his boots struck the packed earth. Wachiwi's mind spun. She didn't know if she could trust this lawman or if he planned to lock them away again. But for now, the ropes were gone, and that sliver of freedom was enough to make her step after him toward the sheriff's office, Ahyoka close at her side, until the dust and the jeers of Red Bluff faded behind them. The platform and the staring men faded behind them as Wade Hollis shut the office door. Ahyoka Dawn stayed so close, her shoulder brushed Wachiwi skies, unwilling to lose contact, even for a breath. Inside the sheriff's quarters felt cool and still scented faintly of dry pine and wood smoke. A small iron stove pulsed with a gentle glow, its warmth spreading across the plank floor. A single cot lined one wall, and a heavy desk with a tin star and ledger stood near the window. Wade filled 2 tin cups from a stone jug and held them out. "Drink," he said simply. Ahyoka drank, first gulping so fast she coughed. Wachiwi drank slower, never taking her eyes off the man who'd just changed the course of their lives. Wade leaned against the desk, arms crossed, waiting until their breathing steadied. "You can stay here tonight," he told them. "No one will bother you." He asked nothing of their past, offering no questions they weren't ready to answer. For the first time in days, Wachiwi felt the edge of fear ease only a sliver, but enough to let her jaw unclench. Night dropped quickly over Red Bluff, turning the windows a deep orange before the light disappeared. Outside, only the jingle of spurs or a distant hoofbeat broke the quiet. Inside the hush carried every sound, the stove's soft ticks, the creak of boots across wood, the scrape of a chair as Wade turned it toward the door. Wachiwi stayed near the wall, rubbing her wrists where the ropes had cut, flexing her fingers to welcome the blood's return. Freedom felt so sudden it almost stung. Ahyoka curled on the cot knees tucked beneath the blanket tin cup clutched like a weapon. Wade moved silently, refilling their cups, then pulled a folded blanket from a cabinet and set it on the cot. "There's only one," he said evenly. "Share it. You'll be warmer." Wachiwi spread the blanket over her sister, smoothing Ahyoka's damp hair like she had in childhood storms. Wade studied them quietly, his gaze lingering on the rope marks. He thought of how simple it would have been to walk on, and of the stage hold-up years ago, when his delay had cost innocent lives. He would not repeat that failure. "You'll be safe here," he said at last. "Door stays locked." He turned the key, slid it into his pocket. Wachiwi narrowed her eyes, unsure if the gesture meant protection or another kind of cage. The question on her tongue shrank to something smaller. "Why help?" she asked. "Because I could." Wade answered no wasted words. He dragged a chair between stove and door revolver resting across his thigh. "Get some sleep. I'll keep watch." Barefoot on the cool boards, Wachiwi studied the lines on his face, the tired strength in his eyes. No gloating, no hunger, only a man who did what had to be done. At last, she lay beside Ahyoka, back to the wall. Her sister's breathing softened as exhaustion won. Wade remained still, listening to the quiet settle. He replayed the day, the jeers at the square, Buck Riker's drunken challenge, the look in the Prairie Settlers' eyes, and knew this was far from over. The town would talk. Some would claim he'd overstepped, others that he had taken the sisters for himself. He could already hear the gossip brewing in the saloon. When the stove fire waned, he fed it fresh sticks, the soft clink of iron damper the only sound. Wachiwi's dark eyes followed every move sharp, even through fatigue. She thought briefly of running the first real chance since capture, but Ahyoka's steady breath anchored her. She also remembered how Wade had stood between her and the drunk, silent and immovable as a stone bluff. That counted for something. She lay back, drawing the blanket over both of them. The cot was narrow and rough, yet far better than a shed floor. Wade stayed in his chair, gun belt, on tilting forward just enough to keep the door in sight. Every horse snort and wagon creak outside made him lift his head. Hours passed. The lamp guttered out, leaving only the dull red glow of the stove. At one point, Wachiwi woke and found Wade still there, eyes fixed on the door. She didn't speak, only watched the quiet strength in his posture, before sleep reclaimed her. Wachiwi Sky watched Wade Hollis for a long, quiet breath, then let her eyes close again. Near dawn, the fire had slumped to dim embers, and a chill crept through the office. Wade rose, crossed to the stove, and stirred the coals until they sparked back to life. Behind him, he heard Wachiwi shift on the cot. She was awake now, hair tumbling loose over her shoulders. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked softly. "Not really," Wade replied with a slight shrug. He could have spoken of nights on dusty trails and memories of war, but he left it unsaid. He poured water into a blackened pot and set it over the fire. Wachiwi stayed silent, knees hugged to her chest, simply watching him move with steady purpose. A tightness she hadn't noticed since the auction began to ease. For the first time since being dragged onto that platform, she felt the chance to breathe. Outside, the first gray light of morning crept over Red Bluff. Soon the Prairie Settlers would wake and talk. Maybe trouble would follow. But for now, the office remained locked and calm, far from the jeers of yesterday. She lay back down this time, facing the chair where Wade sat. Instead of closing her eyes, she watched the glow play across his face until sleep finally pulled her under. Wade stayed in place, drinking the first coffee of morning straight from a tin cup, already weighing what papers he'd need to sign and how far he'd go to keep the sisters safe. By sunrise, the street outside was alive with wagon wheels and hoofbeats echoing off the boardwalk. The sisters stirred to the smell of coffee and the scrape of Wade's chair. The cot creaked as Wachiwi sat up, brushing dark hair from her eyes. Ahyoka blinked against the light, her face softer now, the sharp fear of last night fading. Wade had been awake for hours, his mind set. He wouldn't hand them over, not to Grant Pike, not to the saloon drunks, not to anyone. Whatever the day brought, he would meet it head-on. He placed tin plates on the desk, each with a slice of bread, and filled cups with fresh water. "Eat," he said simply. "We've got a long morning ahead." Wachiwi tasted the bread cautiously, then chewed in measured bites. She hadn't eaten anything this fresh in weeks. Ahyoka devoured hers too quickly, until Wachiwi touched her wrist to slow her. Wade leaned back against the desk, arms folded, eyes on the street beyond the window. He already heard voices gathering news of the auction had clearly spread. Soon came a knock. Wade cracked the door to find Silas Knox, the storekeeper, and his lanky son Cody Knox, the boy shifting nervously. "Morning, Sheriff," Silas said, tipping his hat. "Heard you pulled 2 Apache girls off the block yesterday. Folks wonder what you plan to do with them." "That's none of your concern?" Wade answered without moving from the doorway. Silas frowned. "Town's got laws. Those girls were being sold." Wade cut in his voice hard. "That's over." Silas hesitated, eyes trying to slip past Wade for a look inside. Wachiwi stood stiff near the stove, eyes sharp. Ahyoka pressed into the corner of the cot. Wade shifted to block their view. "Store opens in an hour," he said evenly. "Best wait there if you've got business." The two muttered and retreated down the boardwalk. Wade closed the door and locked it again. Wachiwi watched him return to the desk. "They'll be back," she asked. "Probably," he said. "But they won't take you." She wanted to believe him. The calm certainty in his tone told her he meant every word. He'd spent money and risked his badge already. This wasn't mere charity. Why, she asked again, quieter this time. Because I've seen what happens when nobody steps in, he said, jaw tightening. Not again. It was all he offered, but enough to still the fear twisting in her chest. Later that morning, Wade reached for his hat. I need to ride my rounds, he said, then paused. You know how to handle a rifle? Wachiwi's dark eyes narrowed, and she nodded once. Wade lifted a Winchester from its rack and set it beside the desk. If someone tries that door chamber around and aim waist high, likely you won't need to fire, but if you do, you'll know. Wachiwi hefted the rifle with easy familiarity. Wade noticed the sure way she checked it, gave a single approving nod, and stepped out into the rising heat. While he was gone, she paced the room Ahyoka close by. Thoughts of running still flickered, but the memory of that auction stage stopped her cold. Whatever lay ahead, Wade had made them safer than they'd been in months. An hour later, the door opened again. Wade entered, coat, dusty hat, brim damp with sweat. He hung his hat on the peg and set the rifle back on the wall. For a long moment he said nothing, scanning the room. Any trouble, he asked finally. Wachiwi shook her head. No. Good, he said with a short nod. He watched him for a breath, then let his eyes close. Near dawn, the coals had nearly died, and a thin cold crept in. Wade rose, crossed to the stove, and coaxed the embers back to life. Behind him, Wachiwi shifted on the cot, awake hair loose around her shoulders. You don't sleep much, do you? She asked softly. Wade shrugged. Not much. He might have said more about nights on the trail or scars from the war, but he kept it to himself. He set a pot of water on the stove to heat. Wachiwi didn't press him. She sat with her arms around her knees, watching him move. A tightness she'd carried since the auction loosened a fraction. For the first time since being hauled onto that platform, she felt a breath come easier. Outside, morning light edged into the sky. Red Bluff would stir soon, and gossip, maybe trouble would follow. For now, the office was locked quiet, and the sisters were no longer on that raised board. Wachiwi lay back down, facing Wade's chair, and watched the firelight crawl over his face until sleep claimed her. Wade stayed where he was sipping the first coffee of morning from a tin cup, already mapping what he'd have to face. What papers to sign, how far he'd ride to keep them off that platform for good. By sunup, Red Bluff hummed wagon wheels and hoofbeats mixing with boots on the boardwalk. The sisters woke to the smell of coffee and the scrape of Wade's chair. The cot creaked as Wachiwi sat up, smoothing hair from her face. Ahyoka rubbed her eyes. Her expression was softer, less drawn than the night before. Wade had been up long. He'd decided before dawn he wouldn't hand them back. Not to Grant Pike, not to the saloon drunks, not to anyone. Whatever came, he'd handle it. He set out 10 tin plates with a slice of bread each and refilled the cups. Eat, he said plainly. We've got a long morning. Wachiwi accepted the bread warily, then ate in careful bites the first fresh bread she'd had in weeks. Ahyoka gulped hers down until Wachiwi steadied her with a hand on the wrist. Wade leaned against the desk, arms folded, watching the street through the window. Voices were already rising outside. The auction's news had spread. A knock came. Wade cracked the door. Silas Knox and his nervous son, Cody, stood on the step. Morning Sheriff Silas said, tipping his hat. Heard you pulled 2 Apache girls off the block yesterday. Folks wonder what you're gonna do with them. That's none of your concern, Wade answered, feet planted in the doorway. Silas bristled. Town's got rules. Those girls were being sold. Wade cut in flatly. That's over. Silas hesitated, trying to glance past Wade. Wachiwi stood near the stove, shoulders stiff. Ahyoka curled into the cot corner. Wade shifted his stance to block their sight. Store opens in an hour, he said. If you've business, wait there. They muttered and stepped away. Wade shut and locked the door. Wachiwi watched him return. "They'll come back," she asked. "Probably," he said. "But they won't take you." The certainty in his voice eased something inside her. He'd risked coin, and maybe his badge. This felt more than charity. Why, she asked quieter. "Because I've seen what happens when nobody steps in," Wade replied, jaw hard. Not again. It was enough. Later that morning, he prepared to ride his usual rounds. He paused at the door. "You know how to use a rifle?" he asked. Wachiwi's eyes narrowed. She nodded. Wade took the Winchester from its hooks and set it near the desk. "If someone tries that door chamber around and aim waist high, you probably won't need to fire, but if you do, you'll know what to do." She checked the rifle like someone familiar with its weight. Wade noted her sure handling, gave a short nod, and stepped out into the heat. While he was gone, Wachiwi kept watch, pacing the office with Ahyoka close. Thoughts of running flickered, then died. The memory of the platform stopped her. Wade had made them safer than they'd been in months. When he returned an hour later, his coat dusted and his hat brim damp with sweat, he hung his hat and rehung the rifle. He paused a long moment, then asked, "Any trouble?" Wachiwi shook her head. "No." "Good," he said, and the room held its breath. "You're making a mistake, Hollis. This isn't over." Maybe Wade Hollis said, his voice like dry gravel. "But it's over for tonight." Judge Emmett Cole snapped the folded order shut and swung into the saddle. His men followed, muttering under their breath. Only when the hoofbeats faded did the tightness in the street ease, though Wade's shoulders stayed rigid as iron. He stepped inside, shutting the door hard. Wachiwi Sky still stood at the window, rifle in hand, hardly remembering when she'd grabbed it. "They meant to take us," she whispered. "They meant to try," Wade corrected. 3 long strides carried him across the room. He took the rifle gently and set it aside. But they didn't. Her breath came fast. No one had ever stepped between her and danger without a price. The truth of what Wade had risked, his badge, maybe his life, hit her square. Why, she asked again, but this time the question held wonder, not doubt. Wade met her gaze, steady as a canyon wall. "Because you don't deserve what they planned for you." The words cracked something deep inside her. She moved toward him before she realized it, close enough to see trail dust on his collar, the faint scar along his jaw. He waited, giving her room to pull back. She didn't. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek, his rough hand lingering. Her breath caught. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or planned. It carried the raw relief of survival, tasting of coffee and red desert dust. She clutched his coat. He drew her nearer, anchoring her like he'd wanted since yesterday. When they finally broke apart, they stayed forehead to forehead, silent hearts hammering. Ahyoka. Dawn, wide-eyed, sat on the cot with the blanket clutched around her, but in her eyes flickered something like relief. For the first time, she believed her sister might truly be safe. Wade stepped back, face unreadable, but jaw set. "We'll have to be ready," he said quietly. "They'll come again and harder." "Then we stay ready," Wachiwi answered, her voice steadier, no longer just surviving, but choosing. Wade turned to the desk, gathering the papers he'd need at dawn. Wachiwi stood a moment longer, fingers brushing her lips as if to confirm what had just happened, then sat by the stove and stitched a torn sleeve with quick, precise motions, preparing for whatever lay ahead. Night closed in. The stove glowed. Outside, the Prairie Settlers' voices faded to silence. For the first time since the square, Wachiwi felt solid ground beneath her. She had been bought, rescued, nearly stolen again. Yet now she knew she wouldn't leave this room unless she chose to. Wade glanced up. Their eyes met. No words were needed. For tonight, that was enough. Morning broke pale and sharp frost, silvering the pump handle outside. Wade was already up, coat on, and revolver belt buckled the lines at his eyes a shade deeper, but his step firm. Wachiwi stirred, running a hand through her dark hair. Ahyoka still slept curled beneath the blanket in the first true rest she'd had in weeks. Wade poured steaming water into 2 tin cups and set one before Wachiwi. She wrapped chilled fingers around it, steam rising between them, thoughts knotted by the memory of his kiss and the way he had faced the judge like a rock in the road. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now I ride to the county seat," Wade said, eyes on the window. "I'll file papers to put you under my protection. And if they refuse, then I ride back and we figure the rest," he replied, simply, as if surrender was never on the table. He checked the Winchester, set it near the desk, and fixed his gaze on her. "Stay inside. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." "I will." Wachiwi said, no tremor in her voice. He left before most of Red Bluff stirred, boots crunching on the frosty boardwalk. Wachiwi bolted the door and listened until the hoofbeats of his horse faded into the chill. Turning back, she found Ahyoka awake, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "He'll come back?" Wachiwi said, to reassure both of them. The morning crept by. She washed what clothes they had fed the stove and tidied the room. Yet every time wagon wheels rattled or boots struck the porch, she reached for the rifle. By noon, her nerves were stretched taut. Mid-afternoon brought trouble. Male voices stopped outside the door. One she knew too well, Buck Riker, thick with anger. "She's in there," he growled. "Sheriff ain't here to play guard dog now." The doorknob rattled. Ahyoka froze, gripping her sister's arm. Wachiwi cocked the Winchester with a sharp metallic snap that filled the room. "Go?" she whispered, guiding Ahyoka behind the desk. The door shuddered again. Then another voice called from the boardwalk. "Leave it, Buck." It was young Cody Knox. "Sheriff will be back soon, and you don't want him finding you here." There was cursing, a shuffle of boots, and then the fading clatter of horses. Wachiwi kept the rifle leveled long after silence returned. Only when she was sure they were gone did she lower it. Ahyoka crawled out from hiding. "They'll keep coming," she said in a small voice. "Yes," Wachiwi answered grimly, "but so will he." It was near sundown when Wade finally returned, coat dusty, hat brim low. He swung down from his horse, tied the reins, and stepped inside, bringing the cool evening air with him. The first thing Wade Hollis did when he stepped back inside was sweep the room with a sharp measuring glance, sisters first, then the rifle by the window. "Anyone come by?" he asked. "Yes," Wachiwi Sky replied, "but they left." Wade gave a short nod, his jaw tightening. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and set it on the desk. "Guardianship," he said, "signed by the county clerk. You're under my protection now. Nobody touches you without going through me." Wachiwi stepped forward, lifting the document carefully, tracing the dark ink of his signature, even when some of the words blurred in meaning. "This keeps us here," she said. "It keeps you safe," Wade answered. Something deep inside her loosened. She returned the paper and met his eyes. "You risked everything," she said, not quite a question. Wade lifted one shoulder. Wasn't much of a choice. He moved to the stove, poured coffee, and sat. Wachiwi joined him, elbows on the table. At last she spoke, voice low but steady. "They killed my brother," she said. Wade didn't interrupt. He waited. "It was at the waterhole. Ranchers accused us of stealing cattle. We weren't. Dakota tried to talk to them, but they shot him anyway. We buried him under the cottonwood and ran. We hid in the canyons until they caught us and dragged us to town to sell. Her chin lifted as she met his gaze. I thought it would end there. Wade set down his cup and leaned forward, forearms braced on his knees. It doesn't end there, he said quietly. Not if I can help it. For a long beat, only the crackle of the stove filled the room. Then Wachiwi gave a single, sure nod. Then we stay. Wade's answering nod sealed it. That night felt different. The sisters settled on the cot, Wachiwi, lying so she could see Wade in his chair. They spoke little, but their eyes found each other across the room and held. For the first time since the square, she felt she wasn't just surviving, she was choosing. And Wade, revolver near at hand, felt the same hard weight lift from his shoulders. The Prairie Settlers might still come, and Judge Emmett Cole might return with more men, but tonight the door was barred, the fire warm, and there was quiet inside these four walls. By next morning the frost was gone from the pump handle, the air carrying the scent of horses and dry earth. Wade stood on the porch hat low, scanning the street before he stepped inside. Hours of thinking about the fight ahead, how to hold ground if the judge came back, what the Prairie elders would say about his papers hadn't shaken his resolve. Inside, Wachiwi was already awake. Her black hair was combed and tied back with a calico strip torn from one of the new dresses. Clean and composed, she stood at the desk reading the guardianship papers again, lips moving silently over the lines. "You can read some," Wade said softly from the doorway. Not all, she admitted, glancing at him. "My brother Dakota taught me. I want to know what you signed." Wade stepped closer, pointing to the bold line at the bottom. "That says I'm responsible for you and Ahyoka. If anyone tries to take you, they'll have to fight it out in court, not in the street." Her fingers brushed the ink of his name as if fixing it in memory. "So, staying here doesn't mean we're prisoners?" "No," Wade said firmly. "You're here because I want you safe, not locked away." Something in her settled. She folded the paper neatly and set it back. By late morning, Wade headed out to make his rounds. He felt the town's tension in every sidelong look and low conversation. Outside the saloon, a knot of Dust Creek riders went silent as he passed. He barely noticed the gossip. What drew his eye was the cloud of dust to the South riders coming hard. He turned as Judge Emmett Cole rode in with 3 deputies. Wade's jaw tightened. "Sheriff," the judge called sharply as he dismounted. "I hear you filed guardianship papers. Dangerous precedent." "Dangerous or not, it's legal," Wade answered, planting himself square on the porch. The judge stepped close, lowering his voice. "You're setting this town against you. Folks don't like seeing a lawman claim what they think belongs to them." Wade's gaze hardened. Then they'd better learn quick what isn't theirs. The deputies shifted uneasily. After a tense pause, the judge finally drew back. "We'll see how long you can hold," he said. "There's a town meeting in 2 days. They'll want your answer." Wade watched until they disappeared in a trail of dust before re-entering the office. Wachiwi looked up from the stove. "They came?" "Yes." He set his hat aside. "The judge is calling a meeting. He wants you turned over." Ahyoka Dawn, sitting on the cot, looked stricken. "Will you?" she asked. "No," Wade said simply. "But it means things will get worse before they get better." Wachiwi stood still a moment, then crossed the room to him. "Then we help," she said quietly. Wade studied her brow, furrowing. Help how Wade Hollis listened while Wachiwi Sky gathered her thoughts. She drew a deep breath and finally said, "We will not hide. We sweep, we mend, we work. If the town sees us living like people instead of trophies, maybe they'll stop their talk." Wade weighed her words. He knew the Prairie Settlers too well, some minds would never change. Still, she had a point. If folks watched them live decent, honest lives under his roof, it might strip the gossip of its bite. That afternoon, Wachiwi swept the boardwalk in front of the sheriff's office, while Wade worked at his desk. Ahyoka Dawn helped sort tools and clean the back room. A few onlookers lingered. Some stared, others offered cautious nods. Curiosity softened toward respect. When dusk settled, Wade closed up early, worn thin by a day that had asked more of him than he'd admit. He sat on the porch rifle across his knees, watching the last light drain from the sky. Wachiwi joined him, arms folded against the chill. "They will not stop," she said quietly. "No," Wade agreed. "But neither will I." They stood side by side in silence, listening to a horse stamp in the livery and a dog bark somewhere down the street. When the air turned sharp enough that their breath showed white, Wade opened the door for her. Inside the stove, sent out a soft, amber glow. Ahyoka was already curled beneath a blanket, half asleep. Wachiwi sat on the edge of the cot, her gaze following Wade as he lit the lamp and hung his hat on its peg. "Why stay sheriff?" she asked at last. "You could ride out, start over anywhere. Why stay in a place like Red Bluff?" Wade leaned on the desk, thinking a moment. "Because I've made mistakes I can't undo. Keeping the peace here is how I square the ledger, make sure no one else pays the price I once let happen." Wachiwi nodded slowly, understanding a little more of the weight he carried. "Then maybe we stay for the same reason," she said softly. "Maybe you do," he answered, their eyes meeting across the lamplit room. Later, after the fire burned low, Wade dozed in the chair near the stove, his hand resting beside his revolver. Wachiwi watched him from the cot, her heartbeat calm for the first time in months. For all the threats outside, she and Ahyoka finally had a real chance. She pulled the blanket tighter over her sister and closed her eyes to the quiet rhythm of Wade's breathing. Whatever the next day brought, the meeting, the judge, the town, they would face it together. For tonight, that certainty was enough. The morning of the town meeting arrived gray and cool. A wind slid down from the ridge, carrying the dry smell of cattle and dust. Wade stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, hat in hand, eyes fixed on the saloon where most of the men would soon gather. He'd stood through plenty of meetings, but none like this. This wasn't about fences or grazing rights. It was about the two women under his roof and whether the town would let them stay. Inside, Wachiwi braided her hair with steady fingers, wearing the clean calico dress, smoothed flat at the hips. Ahyoka sat on the cot, swinging bare feet, nervous, but no longer as frightened as that first day. Both had heard Wade promise he would stand with them. When he stepped back inside, his face was set. "It starts soon," he said. "I'm going." Wachiwi replied, shoulders straight. "We come too." Wade hesitated. "It might not be safe." "If we hide, they win," she answered. He searched her eyes, then gave a single nod. "All right, stay behind me and don't rise to their bait." The three walked down Red Bluff's main street together. People turned to watch, some curious, some hostile, others whispering behind their hands. Wachiwi held her head high, each step deliberate on the creaking boardwalk. The saloon had been cleared for the meeting. Benches and chairs formed a wide circle. Grant Pike, the mayor, sat at one end, with Judge Emmett Cole beside him, ranchers and merchants filling the rest. Conversation died as Wade entered with the sisters close behind. "Sheriff," the mayor said, clearing his throat. "You know why we're here?" "I do," Wade answered, removing his hat and setting it on the table. "You want me to surrender the women I claimed yesterday? They aren't yours to claim," a rancher snapped. "They were being sold like cattle," Wade shot back. "I stopped it. I filed guardianship papers. By law, they're under my protection. That law is for orphans, the judge said sharply. Not for grown Apache women who... They've done nothing wrong, Wade cut in. They were taken off open land accused without proof tied and paraded for sale in front of half this town. If that's justice, I want no part of it. A low murmur rippled through the room, some nodding, others frowning. Wachiwi stepped forward before she could second-guess herself. My brother Dakota Red Elk is dead, she said, voice clear. He was shot for nothing. We ran so we would not die too. We were caught and brought here to be sold. If you send us away, you send us back to the men who killed him. Her words fell like stones. The room went silent, except for the creak of a chair as a merchant shifted uneasily. Wade let the silence hang, then said, They stay. Anyone who tries to take them will answer to me. For a long breath, no one spoke. At last, Mayor Pike exhaled and leaned back. You've made your position plain, Sheriff. The Prairie Elders will vote, but it sounds like you've already decided what you're ready to fight for. I have, Wade said, reclaiming his hat. The meeting broke apart in low mutters, and the scuff of boots on the floorboards as the townsmen filed out, leaving the sheriff and the sisters standing firm beneath the hanging lamplight. Some men glared as Wade Hollis led the sisters out, but none dared step in his path. Outside, the wind had swept the dust from Red Bluff's street, leaving the air bright and sharp. Wade walked back toward the sheriff's office with Wachiwi Sky and Ahyoka Dawn close behind. You spoke, he said quietly, as they reached the porch. Yes, Wachiwi answered without hesitation. You didn't have to. I did, she replied. They needed to hear it from me, not only you. Wade studied her for a long beat, pride flickering in his eyes. You did well. Inside life returned to a steady rhythm, but something essential had changed. Wachiwi sensed it in the way Ahyoka moved more freely and in the calmer set of Wade's shoulders as he watched the street. The struggle wasn't over, might even turn uglier, but the town had heard her voice, and she hadn't bent. That evening, Wade carried in a small table he'd built from pine boards, setting it near the stove. For you, he said simply. Wachiwi ran her fingers over the smooth wood, surprised. You built this? He nodded. Figured you'd want a place to sit that isn't a cot. A quiet warmth bloomed in her chest. She set a tin plate on the new table as if staking a claim. We'll use it, she said. As darkness fell, the stove cast a steady glow. Wachiwi sat braiding Ahyoka's hair while Wade worked through paperwork at his desk. The room felt less like a cell and more like a home. When Wade looked up, his eyes met Wachiwi's and lingered a moment longer than before. Later, after Ahyoka drifted to sleep, Wachiwi stepped onto the porch. Wade followed, leaning against the post until his shoulder brushed hers. You know what you said in there? He asked softly. Yes, she replied, her voice even. I stay. Wade's mouth curved in a rare, small smile. Then we'll make sure you can. The night air was cool, the stars sharp overhead. For the first time since her capture, Wachiwi felt a solid, lasting kind of hope, one that made her believe tomorrow could belong to her too. The next morning dawned still and heavy, as if the whole town held its breath. Before the sun cleared the horizon, Wade stood on the porch eyes scanning the silent street. He'd slept little. His chair angled toward the door, hand never far from his revolver. He trusted neither the quiet nor the men who had threatened them. Inside, Wachiwi brewed coffee. The table Wade had built was neatly set with tin plates and a wrapped loaf of bread. Ahyoka sat at the cot's edge, plaiting a strip of calico into her hair. They looked less like fugitives now, and more like a family carving out a life in a wary town. Wade returned, setting his hat on the peg. "Town's quiet," he said, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed doubt. "Quiet before a storm," Wachiwi replied calmly. He gave a single nod. "Probably." By midday, the first warning arrived. A lone rider raced up from the south road, dust boiling behind his horse. Wade stepped outside as the man reined in. It was Finn Dugan, one of the deputies who had ridden with Judge Emmett Cole. Sheriff Finn said breathless, "They're talking about coming tonight. Judge Cole's bringing more men, says he'll drag those women out himself if he has to." Wade's jaw hardened. "Thanks for the warning." Finn hesitated, glancing toward the office door. "I never liked how they were treated, but you should know some of those men mean to finish what they started." "I'll be ready," Wade said. When the deputy rode off, Wade re-entered the office. Wachiwi had heard every word. She stood stiff by the table, hand gripping the chair back. "They will come," she said. "Yes?" Wade answered. He crossed to the gun rack, took down the Winchester, and checked the chamber. "But they won't get past me." He knelt beside Ahyoka. "Stay close to your sister tonight." "You hear?" She nodded quickly, clutching Wachiwi's hand. The afternoon dragged thick with waiting. Wade shut the shutters, checked the locks twice, and set a box of cartridges on the desk. The room grew warm and close, but no one complained. As sunset flared, the sound of multiple horses rolled through the street. Wade rose, shoulders squared, every line of his body ready. Wachiwi lifted the rifle without a word, her grip steady now, no tremor. The first rider into view was Judge Cole Coate, flapping as he swung down. 4 armed men followed. Wade opened the door before they could knock and stepped onto the porch. "Evening," he said flatly. "You know why we're here," the judge replied. "Step aside. Not tonight." Wade answered, his hand resting easy on the butt of his revolver. "This isn't your fight," Hollis Cole snapped. "It became my fight when you put 2 women on a block like cattle." The men behind the judge shifted one hand, brushing his holster. From the window's edge, Wachiwi watched, heart hammering, but Wade's stance never wavered. The porch boards creaked as he stepped down, closing the gap. "You draw on me," Wade said evenly, "and this town will bury 5 men before sunrise. Go home." Judge Cole's face burned red, but he didn't press forward. After a long moment, he jerked his head at his men. "Mount up. We're done for tonight." Wade stayed on the porch until their hoofbeats faded, making sure they didn't double back. Only then did he shut the door harder than he intended. Wachiwi stood near the stove rifle, still in hand. When Wade's eyes met hers, something fierce and unspoken passed between them. Relief, gratitude, and a deeper pull that had grown for days. "You would have fought them all," she said quietly. "Yes," Wade replied. She set the rifle aside and stepped close. The room was hushed, except for the stove's crackle and Ahyoka's gentle breathing. Standing so near, Wade saw the faint rope mark still circling her wrist. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked. He hesitated, only a heartbeat. "Because I won't stand by and watch it happen again. Not to you." Something inside Wachiwi gave way, the last wall she had kept between them. She gripped the front of his coat, and Wade didn't make her wait. He drew her in and kissed her slower than the first time, but deeper, carrying everything he hadn't said since the day he bought her freedom. Her hand slid up Wade Hollis's chest, her body leaning until not a breath of space remained between them. When they finally drew apart, her breathing was uneven, but her gaze steady. "Then we stay, Wachiwi," Sky said softly, the words carrying the weight of a vow. Wade brushed a calloused palm along her cheek. "We stay." That night, the sheriff's office felt changed. The threat of Judge Emmett Cole and the promise of fresh trouble still hung in the air, yet beneath it ran something solid and sure. The sisters settled on the cot, but Wachiwi stayed awake, eyes on Wade, as he kept watch near the door. Their gazes held in the lamplight, and she didn't look away. It was the first time she believed they might not only survive, but actually win. And for Wade, sitting guard with his revolver within reach, it was the first night he let himself picture a life beyond the constant fight. When the fire burned low, he rose quietly, laid on another stick of wood, and the gentle glow spread across the room. Wachiwi followed his movements with calm, measured breaths, until she finally drifted into sleep, trusting he'd still be there when morning came. Dawn broke soft and pale over Red Bluff, spilling light across the sheriff's office floor. Wade was already awake, chair angled toward the door, revolver resting where he could reach it. He hadn't fired a shot, but the strain of a long night showed in the set of his shoulders. He crossed to the stove, stirred the coals back to life, and set the kettle on to boil. Behind him, Wachiwi stirred hair loose around her shoulders. She sat up and watched him a quiet moment, struck by how different this morning felt from their first one here. No ropes biting her wrists, no auction platform waiting, no fear sharp enough to steal her breath. Only the steady man at the stove who had chosen to fight for her. "Coffee?" Wade asked over his shoulder. "Yes," she answered. Voice soft but sure. He poured 2 cups and set one before her. Ahyoka dawn woke, rubbing her eyes, and Wade handed her a slice of bread before she even asked. Today, the Prairie Elders would hand down their decision. Wade had spent half the night deciding what he'd do if they voted against him. He already knew he'd ride the sisters out of town himself and find a place where the law would guard them instead of hunting them. When the sun cleared the rooftops, he buttoned his coat and buckled his gun belt. "I'm going to the meeting," he said. "You two stay here until I send word." "We come," Wachiwi said, smoothing her dress. "It might not be safe." Her chin lifted. "We faced them once. We'll stand again." He searched her eyes, then nodded slowly. "All right, stay close." They walked through town together as they had before, but this time the Prairie Settlers whispered less and stared with fewer hard looks. The sight of Wachiwi sweeping the boardwalk of Ahyoka, carrying water of Wade, guarding them night after night, had begun to shift something in Red Bluff. Inside the meeting hall, Mayor Grant Pike stood and cleared his throat. "Sheriff Hollis," he said formally, "the council has voted. You have legal guardianship of the 2 women. As long as you hold this office, they remain under your protection." The words landed like a hammer strike. Wade gave a single firm nod. Judge Cole scowled, but said nothing. A few ranchers muttered yet offered no challenge. The meeting broke up with no shouting and no threats. Outside, Wachiwi stood beside Wade on the boardwalk. "So we stay," she said quietly, almost testing the sound. "We stay," Wade confirmed. On their way back, Wade stopped at the clerk's desk and signed another set of papers, a petition to recognize the sisters as permanent residents of Red Bluff, bearing his own last name. When he returned to the office, he handed the papers to Wachiwi. She traced the letters with her fingertip. "Hollis," she said slowly. "You gave us your name." "Yes," Wade replied. "So no one can ever take you away." Emotion tightened her throat. She folded the papers carefully and set them on the table like something priceless. That evening, the office felt wholly different. For the first time, the door stayed unlocked while Wade sat on the porch rifle leaning against the wall. Wachiwi joined him, hair loose and dress clean, as the sunset painted the sky in orange and pink. "You could have left," she said after a long silence. "Started over somewhere else." "I thought about it," Wade admitted. But when I saw you on that platform standing like you had nothing left to lose, I knew I was done running too." She turned toward him, eyes soft and a little shy. "So this is where you stay." "This is where I stay," he said. He reached for her hand, rough fingers wrapping around hers. She let him, then leaned in and kissed him, not like their first desperate meeting of lips, but slow and sure, a promise rather than a plea. When they drew apart, Wade didn't release her hand. "You and Ahyoka will be safe here," he said. "You have my word." "Then we are home," Wachiwi whispered. The porch fell quiet, except for the distant thud of a horse in its stall. From inside came Ahyoka's easy laughter. Wade slid an arm around Wachiwi's shoulders and held her close as the last light faded. For the first time since burying Wade Hollis, he felt the weight in his chest lift. And for the first time since Takoda Red Elk was killed, Wachiwi felt life could truly begin again. They stayed like that, saying nothing more, while night settled over Red Bluff, and the stars came out one by one, each point of light marking a place they could finally call their own. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.